I think that's we're starting to get some questions, so I'd like to get to them. I just one quick follow-up, because when, for instance, that photo from 1933 was not, Lochner held it back, but the Hearst News photo service did use it. I'm not sure if they had any consequences, but at the end, at least at the end of the Third Reich, by that time, I think only the AP photo operation was allowed to continue. So is that just that accurate?
Yeah, well, the others folded. The others had gone.
Yeah.
And it's the continuation of the AP photo operation is a complicated story.
Right.
It basically ended up being kind of run out of or under the auspices of the German foreign ministry, and photos were being moved back and forth from Germany to Portugal and to AP in Portugal using the German diplomatic pouch. And this is when Germany and the US are at war with each other.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the war, there were two military investigators from the US who did a full investigation of how this exchange had worked through all those years, and wrote up a report that suggested that the US Justice Department consider charging AP with trading with the enemy because of this exchange using the German diplomatic pouches. That ended up, as far as we know, being put in a drawer. There were no charges. We don't know exactly why, but that was the most controversial thing, I think, that out of this whole operation that was going.
It's a controversial story, and it's a complicated one, but as you describe it well in the book. This gets to actually one of the first questions from the audience. It's someone's asking, to what extent in writing about this, or about the 30s and 40s, did you struggle with the question of historical context and not imposing today's standards or expectations on that period? How would you respond to that?
I want to say something about that. I can't quote you exactly, Andy, of something that you wrote in the introduction to Hitlerland, but it really hit home for me. And you said something like, I'm not going to sit here in judgment of these people. I'm presenting what they said, what they wrote, and this isn't meant to say this guy was terrible, didn't recognize anything, whatever. And I thought and I think, Larry and Randy both said this. We want to present how this unfolded, what decisions were made, how were they made? Sorry?
Yeah, I think you did that very well. I think, I mean, that's definitely was my philosophy in writing about it, but I felt it was, that it's so easy to judge in retrospect.
Exactly.
And to say, I would have understood, I would have done this or that. Unless you're in those situations, I'd be a little hesitant about that. But it's important to understand what they were going through, and then what they ultimately decided, or decided to push or not to push.
And I wouldn't say the book is without judgment. There certainly is a lot of analysis in there, but as you say, who are we to say, well, if I'd been there, I never would have done X, Y, Z. So.
Right. And another question is, what access did the AP and other US journalists have to top Nazis, Goebbels, even Hitler? I think, well, you can respond to that, because there are very specific examples of that in Lochner and others. But Randy, do you want to respond on
that? You would have thought that if Lochner was pro-Nazi, that he would have been given more interviews with Hitler. So he wasn't really used as a mouthpiece by Hitler. He had two significant interviews with Hitler in 32 and 34. And one of the unorthodox policies that he had that may be typical in the 1930s of the previous question was that he was of the opinion to allow the subject he interviewed to edit the interview. so that when he put forth his into the Q&A with Hitler, Hitler withdrew his comments on the Jewish question. That Germany wasn't able to. He didn't want the Jews because they weren't able to integrate within Germany. So for some reason, Lachlan not only with Hitler, but allowed other top government officials to edit his stories. But he had a great relationship with Goring. He was very close with. Goebbels, he was familiar with all of them. He would have a lot of social events, social parties, and he'd invite the top party dignitaries. So
your point, by the way, of how this process of what was in Germany called authorization, that you interviewed somebody and then you gave them the text back so they could do it. It was interesting when my first posting in Germany, in Bonn, in the mid-'80s, a lot of German journalists were still doing that, and some American journalists and others were following that procedure. And when I said, I was fine with having them check if I was translating a direct quote that it was accurate, but I'm saying you're not editing this. But that habit persisted for a long time, and I think not just in Germany, in some other European countries as well. But of course, it becomes a lot more sinister when you're dealing with a Nazi regime.
Right.
All right, there was a question here from Arlene Getz about AP's coverage and how it compared to Reuters. I know why she's asking about Reuters. She used to work at Reuters. But good question about how it could, but there are a couple of questions about how it compared to other news services, because there was also the International News Service, which was the Hearst News Service, and wasn't there, and United Press.
UP, yeah.
And it's worth pointing out, by the way, that United Press, one of their correspondents, who was Richard Hotelet, who later became CBS, and he was the only American reporter in that period in 41 who was held by the Gestapo for a few months.
Yeah.
If I can chime in, so one of the unique things about this book is that we have a chapter devoted to the Holocaust and how AP reported the Holocaust as it unfolded, and we compared it to other news outlets and what they reported. Also, it was important that we had the competition because it kept AP on its toes. UP, there was a lot of competition. UP was known at the time for publishing a lot of sensational stories, outlandish rumors. So like Lochner would get called to the fire because the gatekeepers would be saying, how come we're not keeping up with UP and what they're saying? But a lot of it, but they would report sensational rumors and stories, and AP would have none of that. But one thing that resulted from that, which is fascinating, is that AP created a column called the Rumor Deflator, which would do a fact check on the veracity of these outlandish rumors. But it was short-lived. It was Ken Cooper who killed the feature after only running for 1 month.